All right. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for coming. It's great to have Layne and Doc will be, as I said, will be here with us in a minute to have them back to I guess, go Wedgecraft Volume 2. I think we called it in our small emails, but yeah, we've got some really cool stuff up today. I don't know if many of you saw the email that I sent out this morning, but we're definitely going to have a much more deeper dive into stopping power and how we actually create spin and what variables are involved in that. And then, yeah, I know Layne and Doc have got some pretty cool stuff around that. And then we're going to get into, towards the end, some of the stuff around a badgered Layne for a few of his top drills and exercises that he likes with players. So I know we're going to get into that as well towards the end. So on that note, I'll stop talking less and I'll spotlight Layne's video, and he might, oh, here's Doc here, and he might start to kick us off.
Well, so I would like to first off thank the group for joining us. We enjoyed the first piece, and so we had a little bit of a presentation kind of put together for my staffing here at home in Alabama with Mark Blackburn, and Rob and I have worked on it more and kind of expanded it and added probably 30 or 40% more information to it. And the title of it is Stopping Power, because that was one of the first things that I was curious about years ago. I really didn't understand how good players were stopping the ball. How are they getting it close to the hole? I knew there was a distinction. I at least felt like, you know, some people use land angle, some people use spin, and sometimes I saw different things from seemingly masterful players on tour. So once this study started to evolve, we started to get the ball information we needed to kind of make those distinctions, and that's kind of the genesis of this. It was something that drove me nuts. I said, well, how are these guys doing it, and then how do they get extreme spin when necessary? Are there any benefits to hitting it really high and stuff like this? So those are again, the origin of kind of where this presentation came from. Doc, are you with us?
I am.
Doc, would you like to add to that?
And joining us, and sorry that I was a few minutes late. I had to reboot my computer, and then the technology got the better of me for 5 minutes. But we're online now and ready to go. So whenever Josh wants to kick off, I've got the presentation ready on my machine, Layne, if you don't have it there. So we can go either way.
Morning, Doc. Thanks for coming. It's really, as I said to Layne, I gave Layne the nice intro, but yeah, thanks very much for coming. I know everybody really enjoyed the time and is looking forward to today as well.
Doc, why don't you start us off with the presentation?
Okay. So Josh, can you, do I share my screen with you, or can you control that?
Yeah, I mean, I've got it, but I have made you the co-host, so you can just share your screen and should get that rolling as well.
So just to confirm, you can see the title of the presentation?
Yep.
Okay. So let me just get my notes here, Josh, so that I can. Yeah. I think Layne was giving you a little bit of background anyway, so I won't repeat that. But I think from a coaching perspective, the notion of stopping power is really relevant. And then I think what we've tried to do today, and I hope that by the end of the session that the participants can agree with us, that we've tried to help them understand at which distances, what type of activity is best used to stop the golf ball, and under which conditions you can use these. And then to speak to the practical side of that, Layne's really done a nice job in putting together some of the emphases on the control variables that we talked about 2 weeks ago, that would help you as a coach to determine when what the appropriate inputs might be to create the right conditions for stopping a golf ball. So The whole notion of stopping power, and I'm sure you can read as well as I can speak, so I'll give you a couple of moments to read that on your screens. So we want to understand what it is that's off ball under varying conditions. So the whole notion of stopping a golf ball is kind of interesting in that the tools that we have available to us are going to change depending upon the environment that's afforded us by the golf course. And so if we're really confident and capable in the wedge domain, so if you're masters of the wedge, then there are many directions you can go in order to stop the golf ball. And I'm going to bring the next slide up, Layne, and you can speak to this one for me, please, because this is really getting right at the heart of it.
Doc, I'm not sure how I can see the notes at this point, but I'll begin here. Maybe
just bring them up on your computer. Can you do that or not?
I don't believe. Just out of view options.
You would probably have to
exit. I got you. I'm there. Okay. I just had to get out of. All right. So we're going to begin with what we're dealing with, because we feel like the control variables apply to any and all skill levels. They apply to teachers and both players and coaches alike. And then additionally, there's not a shot you can hit in golf where really these aren't applied. And so we always have to have that context when we think of the control variables. And so what I started seeing here and trying to classify is when I was really looking at the ball behavior early on in the study, Doc was looking at the biomechanical stuff, and I was really looking at the ball. I started to feel like there were some delineations and distances and how people were really stopping the ball. And so we felt like with a little bit of wiggle room on short and long of 20, that 20 yards was pretty much a jumping off point to where you can see on the left there that you really had to have a steep land angle inside 20 yards on PGA Tour greens and setups, because you could see that all the launch angles were a little bit higher in these shorter distances off of our players that we tested. And so when the launch angle is higher, the land angle is just slightly steeper. That would be the case. We made a summary, like why would this be? It's because the ball won't stop close to the hole when they're in a square face condition, and there's usually an open face condition when you're pitching on the PGA Tour, because the green surfaces are just too firm and fast. And so that kind of describes the inside 20. And then to further bolster that theory is the fact that it's really high risk and very unusual if you see someone genuinely go into a flop shot mode to, try to hit a flop shot of 20, 25 yards and 30 yards. They really try to avoid that scenario. And so moving forward into our second zone of distances, you can see we've clustered the zone of 20 yards to 50 yards, where the primary means of stopping the ball around the hole has shifted. Inside 20 yards, it was a steep land angle, and from 20 to 50, we shift into a very high spin area. And that's critical from the standpoint that that's an unusual space. You don't usually, statistically on shot length, there's not a lot of shots hit from those distances, because it requires such a high skill to get the ball to spin, really, like we're saying. But you're in a position where you just have to spin the ball a bunch, and then finally, when you get after about 50 yards, you start swinging at the ball harder. As we'll show with more information later, the ball travels higher, you're swinging harder, and that's when you can kind of, maybe the best in the world can spin the ball more at shorter distances. So this is kind of again, a gray area. Sometimes this is actually 70 yards for some players, where you start to double up. You have maximum spin rate starting to occur and maximum land angle starting to occur. But that's kind of how we've clustered the distances and the mindset behind it.
And Josh, can I chime in there? If anyone has questions along the way, then we'd like to take them, but it's hard, obviously, to know when they're coming in and so forth. But if you could control that and help us out to make it as interactive as we possibly can. And then just before we move on, Layne, in that 20 to 50 yard bracket, the reason I think that you don't see many shots out of the ShotLink data and on the PGA Tour in this range is that the players try to avoid it, primarily because the precision required for these shots goes, out the roof. You have to be precise. So if you make an error trying to hit a high spinning shot at this distance, and you don't do it properly, the consequences are high on PGA Tour green complexes. The ball probably is going to miss the green. And so that's, you get inside 40 yards and you're thinking as a tour player, well, this is a good chance for me to get up and down. Maybe it's a birdie, maybe it's a par. It doesn't matter. It's get up and down, hit it close. But if you are in that zone and it's a complicated green complex, then the precision required for that shot is really, really high.
Okay.
So the things that we think, and again, I think Layne is probably better off talking to these next couple of slides than I, but I'll start it out here. So what we've done is gone through the categories here of I guess kind of in those categories, what are the factors that are the greatest influence on the launch and land angles? So go ahead, Layne.
Yeah, so if we kind of go to the second phase of influences, and all of these are equal, it's just we're kind of going through different segments of influences. We're looking now at the launch and land angle concepts. And so these are really involved here because if you launch the ball too high, you simply can't stop. You don't generate enough spin. And so, but there comes a point in time at short distances where even though you spin the ball a lot, the ratio of spin is very high. Spin per yard is highest on shorter shots. Actually, the stuff we saw from 10 yards on our tour players are commonly 375 to 400 RPM per yard on these shorter distances. The problem is the land angle is so shallow. It's it's launching at 32 and commonly around 32, and it's coming in around 36. And 36 is just not a number that's going to grab on the green. And then the reverse is true. Sometimes the only solution to getting the ball close to the hole is pitching it straight up in the air. And when you do that, there's no spin on the ball, and you hit flop shots or knuckle balls. And so really the bird that really doesn't exist is a ball that truly launches high and achieves a high height that spins a lot. That one is not out there by our standards. It's either one or the other. It's either launched on the lower side of things and it spins a lot, or it's launched on the higher side of things and doesn't spin very much comparatively. And so the things that influence that we heard a lot from the players are the slopes that both the shot is being played from and the green complex. Okay, and so just slight differences of 1, 2, and 3 degrees of change on a downslope lie or on an upslope into the green has huge effects on ball behavior and spin loft conditions, okay? Secondly, the environment around the golf ball for a second. Let's just think about where the player is standing. Grain and type of grass and the amount of moisture, like West Coast PGA Tour, Poana that's wet compared to middle of the summer, US Open at Shinnecock in middle of the afternoon. Those are vastly different environments for the same technique trying to spin the golf ball. It's just one kind of lends itself to spin and the other one really doesn't for the way that the club needs to interact with the golf ball. All of these things the players need to be keenly aware of, and then wind direction is obviously critical because, again, just a few degrees of shifting can really assist a ball stopping or not stopping. And so that's kind of the notes surrounding that slide. Doc, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, and I think that it's probably evident that green firmness is a big factor. So for your club golfers, if you suddenly made your green complexes, let's even say 20% firmer than they're used to playing on, they would struggle to keep the ball on the green, let alone close to the hole. So when the softer the green gets, the less important spin becomes and the more important land angle becomes. So for your amateur golfers, the ability to access the spin register isn't as high as for an aspiring golfer or someone who's playing professional golf. So we're not trying to state that, gosh, every amateur golfer needs to be able to spin the crap out of the golf ball, because they're typically not going to face conditions like that. But when they do, if they have that in their arsenal, then they're going to perform better. So if you change golf courses, so if you're used to playing a soft golf course all the time, and then you go out to and the green complexes are harder and faster, then that amateur player is going to need to be able to at least move towards the direction of being able to create spin to help them. And so that's, I think, a good place to leave that there. And clearly, downwind into the wind makes a huge difference in terms of stopping power as well.
And from a coaching standpoint, I think it's incredibly important, just to reiterate that when you're playing a diverse schedule of events for a national team or a college team in the States or a big amateur schedule, and you're seeing all these grasses and all of these conditions, and they get pretty racy. I mean, these golf courses really like to host an event, and they slick it up and dry it out as much as possible. This is when it becomes really important from a coaching standpoint that the players can have some adaptability to the conditions, and they kind of know what they're looking at. And it was always frustrating, of course, when your training facility doesn't allow those conditions to exist. But it's really bad if you don't know how to generate spin at all, and you're in a big event and your ball won't stop close to the hole. And that's really what's happening, I feel like, to inexperienced players oftentimes. And so they have to get exposure to it, and then they start to adapt. But if the point of this is, hopefully this information from a coaching standpoint can help communicate a lot of that and avoid it.
You know,
So
great example, Josh, is the guy who has qualified for a US Open, gone through the various stages, gets to a US Open, and then is faced with a golf course that he is unlikely to have ever experienced before, and probably hasn't developed the tools to be able to cope with that situation. Because even at that level, it's separating out the tour players as well. those who are capable and those who are just not quite good enough to be able to access the upper echelon of wedge control.
And you see it here even in weekly club golf versus, say, rolling into the club champs or rolling into some amateur event that they might turn up to where, yeah, the green staff have got the courses as hard and fast as they can for a premium event. And typically people wonder why then their scores kind of go a lot higher up than when they're playing something that's a bit more generous.
Yeah, perfect example. So Layne, next one, spin friction. We'll get a bit into this one. And we won't spend a whole bunch of time on the theories of friction and so forth. We've got a little slide towards the end of the presentation that I think will help you to understand it. But I think we need to look at the equipment first. And we've talked a bit about course. Those other 2 points, ball, grooves, and club face, Layne.
Yeah, and so we give this information out a lot. We do think it's really imperative that the people understand that when they go to buy a golf ball, the price point and the way that the ball market is structured, it's not built around distance. You can buy inexpensive golf balls at half the price, inexpensive golf balls, excuse me, that go a long way at half the price that a ball that spins and has high performance around the green would be priced at. And so the point is you pay for spin, okay? And if you desire spin and you understand how it can be a big weapon in your game, that's a really big part of the formula, the construct, is playing a premium golf ball. It amazes me how a lot of people do not understand that. And sometimes they even buy a high quality golf ball, but it doesn't fit their game. Like for instance, the Titleist AVX is a very nice golf ball, very well selling golf ball, but it is just not going to perform and spin anywhere in the stratosphere that a Pro V would perform around the greens. And so just understanding that is critical. And then it also goes into practice in that application. So the quality of the golf ball is huge. Doc?
Yep. Don't need to say anything more there. Grooves are going to be crucial for you. You've got to keep them fresh and they've made really good engineering developments in this area over the last 6 to 8 years, particularly with wedges. I mean, they did some foundational work back in the late 90s where Ping introduced the square groove, and then the USGA had to respond by changing the rules of golf and things like that. But in recent times, the milling of the club face and the quality of the grooves in the production process has really enhanced your ability to create spin from less than ideal conditions. That's where your grooves really help you the most. On a really firm, tight fairway, the grooves aren't really helping you there. It's just in the more adverse conditions. And then when it comes to practice, Layne, what about club face conditions?
The club face just gets absolutely battered by any kind of strikes on the face. And so, you know, this is kind of targeting the developing player. You assume the developing player is practicing a lot. The problem with that as it pertains to club face is you're generally packing the club face with a lot of reps of a lot of dirt and grass and moisture. Oftentimes you're hitting cheap golf balls that oftentimes have sand on them while you're hitting them. So it's kind of like sandblasting your club face while you practice. I would think of it differently, and I kind of try to stress to my students that it's important to do quality rather than quantity. Of course, there needs to be a lot of practice in this space, but it's really nice to slow down, do a lot of gaming with, say, 3 balls or 5 balls in your pocket, have a towel, have a tee with you to stick between the grooves, between shots, remove all the grass. You will see huge differences in the magnitude of 25, 30, 40% change in spin rate by doing so. with just good practice, good deliberate practice, it'll pay off.
Yep. All right. We're starting to get into the meat of it now, guys. There's some numbers coming up, some charts and so forth. And we don't want the roller doors to go down and turn you off. So Layne's going to, well, me to a lesser extent, but we're going to talk through the key points on these slides. So we're doing an example with Luke Donald now. And we were fortunate to have been able to collect data with him and Pat Goss, his coach, a few years back. And they were very interested in some of the explanations and understandings that we have since been able to provide for them. And I can honestly say to you, at the time we were collecting the data, they were asking questions that neither Layne nor I could answer. We just didn't have enough knowledge and experience at that time to really be confident about the answers that we might give. So our typical response was, look, I don't know, but I'll go and find out for you. And that's what our endeavors have been over the last 3.5 years, is to answer those difficult questions that tour players at Luke's level and Jason Duffner, Graham McDowell, Charles Howell have asked us along the way, in order that we can be able to give them the answer, but also be able to provide it in a way that would be helpful from a coach's perspective as well. Now, there's one topic already that Layne mentioned. It's called, it's a way of representing spin rate. And up here on this screen, let me see if I can get my mouse to go over there. On Luke's 10-yard square face, SF is square face, what he calls square face. So it's a bit of a generous description of square face, actually. We've said his spin rate is 380 RPM per yard. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you a simple example that I think you can understand readily. So if you've got your TrackMan or FlightScope device out on the range and it's windy, you put it into normalize mode, so that what you are doing with the TrackMan is, I'll say TrackMan, it could be any other launch monitor, is you're trying to take out the confounding variables like wind or the golf ball that you're using and those sorts of things, to see how that player is performing. What we're trying to do with putting spin rate as a function of distance that the ball carries is to normalize it and make it comparable across people and then across distances. So that's the thinking behind this terminology that we'll use here. You can always see the absolute spin rates in the charts as well, but I think it's important to look at these characteristics here to go comparing across distances. Go ahead, Layne.
So if we take a look at this block of data, as Doc noted, and I previously mentioned, it's not uncommon to see a player in a square face mode from 10 yards, average in the 375 range. And the upper spectrum, you'd see a little bit north of 400 RPM per yard. In Luke's case, it's important to understand, kind of going through this study, he plays a really open face bias. So we, just telling you a little bit of our data collection efforts, we thought we could, with Doc's sensor on the club and understanding where lead edge and loft are pointed, we thought we could convince the players to just square the lead edge and hit shots, just kind of as an objective baseline. Can you point the club at the hole? Let's swing and see what happens when it goes 10 yards. That was our intention, and that was kind of the instructions given, only to realize soon, with a variety of reasons, like Luke never would do a shot like that. It would be equivalent of asking him to hit it cross-handed, we found out. Like, he would never square the lead edge no matter what. He would change clubs and he'd do all these other things, but he would not square the lead edge. And so what happened is that ended up skewing some of his data and his ball behavior, which was fine. It was a true learning moment for us. But as we look at this, let's keep that in mind. And so 380 RPM per yard is not uncommon in a square face condition. What is a little bit uncommon as we look at this launch angle of his, it's a little bit high because, again, he's fudged the loft number. We would typically see this a little bit lower than that. And so Luke's ball behavior is, I call it like pitching to a lily pad on a pond. It's like he pitches it, it flies all the way to the hole at one check and kind of stops. The way that he's achieving that, primarily that different look, is a launch and land angle concept. It is not because he's spinning the ball more, it's just because of the way that he's using loft in this space. He's still maintaining spin, obviously. He hasn't slipped off the spin loft mountain, but he's close. It is a higher risk piece. You don't see a lot of people opt to go this way for their standard motion. It's important to realize that we don't, if you look at data like this as much as we have, you could do a lot of coaching just with the metrics and of ball behavior right in front of you. We can make a lot of solid assumptions from the ball behavior about what the club behavior is doing with players and wedges. If you can kind of start to learn the launch angles and expected spin rates and kind of use them as a gold standard for your teaching. And
do
so,
you know which club he was using here?
He was using a 59-degree, 4-degree bounce Mizuno wedge with a little bit of heel relief. He has very little. He has experimented very little with this particular, his high loft club and its design. I think even from his earliest years on tour, he's pretty regular with that. He doesn't fiddle around with his putter either, if you've noticed. I think once he likes something, he learns the tool pretty well. So obviously, some of that is kind of reflected in his data. The reason why number 4 is highlighted is because clearly he slipped off the spin loft mountain. You can see that launch angle at 39 degrees. That's really outside of the window. And so you see an enormous drop in his spin rate when that's the case. And that would be kind of like a blooper, is what he calls them, pop-ups. It'd be the kind of shot he's embarrassed by. He kind of wants to drop the club. It's kind of the common reaction to that kind of, that's a frustrating shot to hit. But I think that's some of the risk you run when you're in that space playing really open face and that styling he has. It's high risk, high reward. Doc, would you like to add anything there?
No, I don't think we need to. Just remember these numbers for Luke. So let's say launch angle 36 and land angle
37.
37, yeah. Pretty similar launch and land.
Yeah. And so as we go to 10 yards, the next slide, we start to see he actually he has a total loss of spin. Knuckleballs, his spin rate drops off the mountain altogether, only 180 RPM per yard, but he has a 20-degree increase in land angle. And so this is a crazy high blooping shot. And it just shows you really the style he plays. This is a little bit unique to Luke again, but this is an option. This is what he chooses to do. But you see the volatility also. The spin rate is rather inconsistent, along with the carry distances suffer as well. It's hard for him to control these things because the smash is so low.
So,
and so he really doesn't.
If we go back to the previous slide, you'll see that the carry distance consistency number is 0.6 versus 1.9 here. So he's like 3 times as bad. when he, in terms of his control of distance, when he goes to this open face condition. So
Right.
it's probably one that he would avoid using because he knows he's not as good at controlling his land spot anywhere near as well as his stock standard delivery. So then anything else, Layne, to add or not?
No.
Okay. So I just, that's highlighted there just to show you how much he can vary the land angle, right? So from 37 to 57, basically. So pretty remarkable change. I don't think in many of the players we saw that kind of dynamic range in land angle. Did we, Layne?
No.
From memory?
No.
That was all.
No.
So,
that was all just opening the face, or he hadn't made any other. Does he make any other tweaks when he changes to that shot versus?
he changes with the way he'll basically the way he'll do things differently with his body in order to do things slightly different with shaft lean at impact. So
what's
go ahead.
yeah,
Layne.
so what's interesting now, we can start to see comparative data. We see the 37-degree land angle emerge again. So even though he's hitting the ball 20 yards further, the behavior of the ball landing on the green, the angle it's coming in is exactly the same. That's rather amazing to me when I started to really uncover this, and it's not uncommon. So that's something to realize. It is not only consistent, is what is that value? What does that value mean? And we're gonna have those thoughts kind of marinate and talk about it some more. You could see as he's hitting the ball further also, the spin rate, 225 RPM, has dropped significantly compared to the 10-yard shot where it was nearly 400 RPM per yard. So that is really not, these are normal, rather standard things we see with our tour testing. And I'd also say at 20 yards, yet again, he has a 37-degree land angle. I know we didn't feature that slide, but at 10, 20, and 30 yards, square face condition, the ball is coming into the green on the exact same angle. The only thing different is the overall spin being generated is increasing. And so now we start to see the importance. You could see the break, the delineation around 20 yards. As I explained, if the ball keeps coming into the green at the same land angle, it becomes more and more important that you generate more spin, overall spin. So, Doc?
Yep. Are there any questions on that slide? Because I mean, I know that we're throwing a lot of data up there, Josh. Sorry.
Yeah, I've had a few coming in. Andrew Gurney asked if you had the dynamic loft for these shots, but Simon Muckley, he asked, all of these are from pretty tight fairway conditions, right?
Even the open face ones are, yes.
Yep.
We do have data from the rough as well, but we don't have any square face from the rough because the tour players just say, no, I'm not going to play square face from this condition. So always open leading edge. And dynamic loft, it depends on which device you measure it.
Sure.
So
cool.
I would say typically if you're measuring it on a TrackMan device, it's 4 to 5 degrees less than the actual dynamic loft. If you were to measure it on a really high quality, either launch monitor like Foresight, a photogrammetric one, or a Qualisys motion and video type system, that's going to be much more than the radar devices. Yep. They kind of back engineer the dynamic loft in TrackMan or in radar devices by looking at how the ball launches and then saying, all right, well, it must have been this dynamic loft given the attack angle that I've been able to measure.
And do you have the spin loft numbers for a typical shot of those?
Yep.
Are we
We'll
getting to that?
So do we don't have a slide of those, do we, Layne?
Of the spin loft numbers?
Yeah.
No.
No, but I can tell you off the top of my head that the spin loft, these tour players are typically working around in the square face condition is 53 or 54 degrees. And when they go to open leading edge, they'll push the limit and they'll go right up to the top of the spin loft mountain.
Which is 60, isn't it?
No, it's less than 60 actually, Josh. It's probably just under, maybe 57, 58, something like that.
Sure.
But we've got a good example later on to show you that mountain. I'm happy to take more questions on spin loft and so forth at that point.
Great.
All right, Layne, so we're going to change tack a little bit because we're going to bring up a different player here. And I think this is one of the most phenomenal examples that you'll see this afternoon, other than when Layne yesterday.
So we also tested Al, who's had a prolific career on tour making money, and he's had an amazing career. He's really steady. He's got good form and power everywhere. We didn't really know what to expect from his wedges, but we were astounded by some of the stuff he put on the board. He was incredibly consistent, and he had some really amazing numbers. If you take a look at this, you can see, remember I spoke on the 37-degree land angle. You start to realize he's launching the ball higher than Luke, and he's landing the ball steeper than Luke. And he also has probably 10, what is it, Doc, 10% more spin than Luke. And so he's really got a weapon here at 30 yards that kind of goes, these inputs at 30 yards he was doing is amazing to see from our perspective. The spin ratio is rarely seen. I don't know that we've seen one really that high in all the data we've collected. And so when you couple that, he can really stop the ball probably better than anyone we've seen at 30 yards at least. And so in our view, this is pretty representative of maximum stopping power, because he's really doubled up as steep as you could get the land angle at that distance in our view, and about as high as you're going to get that spin rate. What's interesting to note, Doc collected this data, and he was hitting off of really dry Bermuda grass. It was a little bit down grain. It was extremely tight turf, and it was slightly into the wind. And there's no question these elements of the environment, like the influences and those slides we went over earlier, those are really contributing factors to, I think, this performance. And so the players know that. There's no question they kind of sense those opportunities, in my view. And
I think, Layne, if we reflect back to when we collected the first lot of data with Jason at the Bears Club, and we had him, it was where we selected to hit the shots from. It was nice tight turf, don't get me wrong, but the grain was slightly into him, and he executed the square face and the open faces shots extraordinarily well. But then we asked him at the end of the session to hit some really high spinning shots, like max it out. And he had about maybe, I want to say 5 or 6 attempts. And then his words were, "Fuck this, it's just too hard with this grass." And so the conditions weren't right to create that type of shot. And so he said, "Look, I would never try this on the golf course. If I was presented these conditions, it's not even a choice I would think about." So.
Yeah. So it's just, if you look at this chart, it's an amazing performance from 30 yards. It's a spectacular block of information that we gathered. And so, Doc, based on that, let's kind of pivot to some video here. Let's look at this next piece.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going to get playing here, Layne, or do you want to speak first?
I'll speak while it's playing. Maybe how about we do both?
Yep.
We might play at times. So Doc, we're conducting this presentation, and we were missing a few elements of the I guess presentation. We had some holes and some points we were trying to make, and so I was with Duffner yesterday, and so we were capturing some 3D of some shorter shots, and I said, why don't you hit some 40-yard shots, because we were trying to do some maximum spin concepts. And so this is just him dropping literally 4 balls, and I know it's playing a little bit choppy. Is it choppy for everybody, or is it smooth for some folks? The illustration is he hit 4 shots. One of them hit the pin, and then the other 4, I think, collectively totaled. The proximity to the hole was under 10 feet on all 4 shots combined, the cumulative total. So he hit everything inside, say, 2.5 feet for sure. But it's actually not that uncommon for me to see stuff like this from the class of player that we've tested. When you kind of see their TrackMan data and what Charles just did in the last slide we showed, and you watch Duffner practice, or Luke, or VJ Singh, or people like that, they do these like virtuoso performances. This is like stealing for Duff. If he could just repeatedly in block practice hit it 40 yards, it's almost too easy for him. Like he's literally almost making these shots. So anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that in there to show you a little bit of ball behavior for one, but the consistency piece from another perspective.
And just to add to that, it's extremely rare to see the ball back up. You have to have incredibly favorable conditions, and primarily you need to be hitting the ball into an upslope to get it to come back at you. It's television and the public like to see that shot, but it's a rare bird. So I go to the next slide, Layne. Here we go. So again, the idea of this slide here was just to show you, like you saw Duffner with a 40-yard shot, his proximity or his landing point was extremely similar. Here's Luke hitting a 50-yard square-faced shot, and you can see, if the TrackMan image here or the dispersion, it's really tight. Now, look, I understand these were blocks of 5 shots, so at that level, you'd expect them to be tight. Like if you made it randomized, they wouldn't be as good as that. But if you give these guys just one shot to get, oh yeah, I know what that is, and then off they go, this is the sort of thing they're capable of doing. Anything else, Layne?
Yeah, in fact, when we laid, this was pretty astonishing to me, when we laid Luke Donald, Tom Kite, and Jason Duffner's 50-yard blocks on top of each other, the apex of those trajectories from all 3 players were all 15 balls were within 3 feet of each other. All of the launch angles are the same, all the spin rates match, and all the characteristics of the ball flight land angle are identical.
And then moving out to the hard data for the 50-yarders, Layne, just what he calls square face.
Yeah, and so now we start to get into a really high-end performance from Luke, where we, again, normally tested around 150 RPM per yard. As you could see that in the small italics, Luke he put on a show of 176 RPM. Again, you see the 37 land angle emerge. So again, at 10, 20, 30 yards and at 50 yards, 37-degree land angle is always there. That explains the importance of spin, because if the angle is always the same, there's only one differential, and that would be spin as far as getting the ball to stop around the hole. This was an incredible piece because of how consistent he was as well. The carry distances, the launch and the land, everything was pretty spot on. He's really on the cusp of probably slipping off that spin loft mountain like we've mentioned before, because everyone else was probably flighted slightly lower than this and didn't really have that that friction. He's hitting this ball a little bit lower on the face than a lot of people, and he kind of plays an open club face. His path is slightly left. It's a little bit of a cut shot, and that's, again, his bias that he's in 50 yards. And really, he's not capable of doing that from really much further than this. This is kind of the jumping off point you see in players on their cut style of shots. Once you get into the distance zone, beyond this, it becomes pretty standardized and square face or even draw for the various reasons we'll talk about later. But you don't really see players very often get in a cut mode from outside of 50 yards. Doc?
Yeah, that's true. And then I wanted to just highlight how quite incredible this performance is, because here we have a 17% greater spin rate per yard than his competitors. All of these guys playing PGA Tour, he's 17% better at generating spin at this distance. And again, to put it in perspective, if Usain Bolt holds the record for 100 meters at something like, I want to say 8.65 seconds, is it? Something like that. If you just do the quick math, and you gave someone 10% faster than Bolt, so 0.86 of a second, it's under 7 seconds for the 100 meters. And he would just have shattered the competitors. I mean, and maybe that's an extreme example, but this kind of gets to the heart of the matter here that we're talking to you about, is that you are seeing some data here that are absolutely out of the world for these different types of shots that these players are hitting. And it's not everyone that can access these. We were lucky enough to get to these really high-level tour players who are capable of doing that. We got a surprise with Charles Howell. I didn't think that he was going to be anywhere near as good with the wedge as he was, but he was very, very impressive. And Luke can show you this stuff, and there's no wonder that he was so renowned for his short game. And I think just to realize how much different that is to perhaps the average tour player or even the high-level amateur is astounding.
How much would this data get impacted if you were measuring or collecting one of the pros here on a mat? Is it even worth collecting some of this data off a mat, or do you always need to switch to the grass? And then,
do you want to jump on that one, Layne?
I think there's value in collecting data for sure. If you have a professional, I think you always got to collect data, and you got to make copious notes on. I think the conditions that you're hitting from. You got to recognize that there's big influences. There's no question that you can spin a ball more off the mat for a variety of reasons. Probably the most evident reason, the simplest to understand, is that you have no introduction of materials like grass, dirt, or water interfering. You really only need to watch off the mat, the ball surface starting to accumulate on the wedge face surface. And after it seems a few strikes, you do need to be wiping that and keeping the face dry, getting the debris of the ball off the face. I mean, these guys can paint the face with just shredding the golf ball. You get huge white marks on the face when they're on mats, I've noticed. But Doc, what would you like to say about the mat other than that?
I think that, quite honestly, it's if you're collecting research data, it's not very valuable, but teaching, it's quite fine. And then the second part is that what I think, I know for sure, but I think happens is that the mat and the ground behave differently when the club touches it. And so you get, you actually get to meet the ball on a different place on the club face when you're hitting off a mat compared to when you're hitting it off grass. And I'm saying tight fairway type grass. So there are differences in technique that can be found out when you have someone hit off turf versus a mat. But I'm not saying don't use it, because it's still a valuable tool for you to use when teaching short game. The other thing that, just again as a little aside, when I did the robot testing at St Andrews, after every shot, I would go in and clean the club face with denatured alcohol, so that it was absolutely clean and dry. And I would clean the golf balls with denatured alcohol as well, so that you had the extremely consistent conditions for each shot, so that, you know, when you're making comparisons, you know that it wasn't just because I'll clean the club face on those last shots, or balls weren't clean, and so forth. So that's the kind of detail that you need to go to if you're going to conduct research at the level that we've done it. But I'm not saying that that everyone needs to go to that extreme.
Doc, let's show them the next video. Yep. Duff just kind of, so Mark Blackburn did a Instagram post earlier today. He's got a feature on his Instagram called Wedge Wednesdays, where he throws out some information, short game from a variety of different subjects. Well, yesterday we had Duff hitting this shot. This isn't the footage because he was in 3D suited yesterday, so we have that. But this is a crazy number to put up on the board that you don't see very often. I've seen it a few times. I've seen him do it. I haven't had launch monitors on some of the other players I suspect that do it rather regularly. I know Luke Donald can produce numbers like this. It's possible to do this when they really get into this really high spin zone. We call it the cheater, and you'll learn more about why we call it the cheater. But let's play that video, Doc. I don't know. I can
left
access.
one? Target line?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just watch.
Yes.
You can, couple things that jump out when I watch that. Left, the club is traveling through impact, how open the club face is, and how low the ball takes off. Considering that your average, remember your average spin rate is 150 RPM. Doc, what percent change in performance is that?
50 out of 150, so it's like 33%, right?
There you go. There you go. That's why we've got PhD there. I'm terrible on some of these numbers. Thank you. All right. So when you can just pop this one up and you can come up with this, you said, well, why? One of the things in the Instagram post is, why would you do this? Why is this necessary? First off, you learned it from BJ. It would blow our minds. We spent a lot of time, Duff and I, collectively around BJ in 2004. He won 9 times, and he'd hit these shots 2 or 3 times a day, I think just to kind of scramble our minds a little bit, but he was so good at it, and he would barely leave a mark on the ground. It'd sound really clicky, kind of off the teeth of the club. It didn't sound or look like anything I've ever seen before. And so VJ eventually kind of told them a lot of the ingredients of what's going on here. But the reason why you'd hit it, you know, we all commonly know Augusta National. If you think about a front pin on number 3 at Augusta, those guys get in there and they drive it up in there, they lay up, but inevitably someone's got a wedge into that green. And if you get a front pin on number 3 at Augusta, there's no way that ball is going to stop. There is absolutely no way, especially from certain distances that they're putting themselves in. This is a scenario. It usually comes out with a decent amount of cut spin on it. It'll check to the right when it hits. But this is kind of virtuoso stuff. And this is, I don't see a lot of rookies being able to do this. I think this is more of like a Ryder Cupper piece in my view. This is upper echelon. Major championship winners are capable here. Not to say that others aren't capable, but this is definitely in the arsenal of the top 20 in the world, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Layne, just as a little side note, I left that screen out there as close as I could get it to impact. You can see there's still a substantial amount of shaft gleam despite the really open leading edge of the club face. So it's an interesting combination of technique and club delivery that allows them to access this register. All right, so moving on here. You know this fellow, and one of the reasons we included this slide here is to show you really a couple of key variables that kind of speak to our notion of the under 20 yards, 20 to 50 yards, and then 50 to whatever it is, 125, depending on how far they hit the wedge. Probably more like 50 to 100. They don't typically, they'll hit a wedge at those distances, but not a 60-degree wedge or a lob wedge. So let me see if I can get the mouse over to this slide here. So this is notionally a 10-yard carry by Graham, and the average of 5 shots was 10.5 yards, so he met that criterion. This was the average height of the shots. Okay.
Little footnote, Doc. Graham uses a 58-degree wedge, so if you apply those launch angles and those land angles, you quickly start to realize he's right on top of the others as far as how he's using the tool and how he's presenting the club matches the others. It's not that he's got a 35-degree land angle, he's got a different club in his hand. So anyway.
And I think sometimes the images speak louder than the numbers. If you look at the launch window here for the 3 different categories of shots, they're so close, within a few degrees. And but the big difference is the height that the ball goes, particularly the 75-yard shot, but the way in which the land angle changes between these 2 conditions here. When I say the 2 conditions where Layne called this distance where you double up your stopping power. So now we've got really high spin coupled with a steep land angle. And at 30 yards, this is high spin for a 30-yard shot, but it still only gets 16 feet in the air, and so that you don't get a very steep land angle. And it just gets worse as you go to the shorter distances. So Layne, you might want to talk about strategy here then in terms of stopping power.
Yeah, I think that it's so simple to understand, but I don't hear coaches and teachers, people that work with young players, mention this. We're missing some of the pieces on how to manage groups. Like I was a coach of a team, and so when you send a team out and everybody faces the same layup position and the same pin, and how to access it becomes really important in your team meetings. Like, hey, can everybody shake their heads and we're going to lay up on number 7 tomorrow? You know, that's kind of your team meeting. You hope they do it. Well, I think it's really simple to see a slide like this and realize as a coach that if the only place that I'm going to get double up stopping power is when I'm hitting my maximum loft, maximum speed, then you need to say, well, okay, give me the pin sheet in the morning when I go to the tent and I trade scorecards and I check in with the starter. Let's look at the pin sheet. Let's immediately have our eyes go to the front pins and then isolate them. They'll probably be about 6 if it's a good course setup. And then you say, well, are those wedges? Are those wedge opportunities, or is it a mid iron? Now, if they're wedge opportunities, that's when I think the alarm bells need to ring as a coach, and you communicate that back to the group. Or as a player, you need to understand it's really crucial that I lay up to probably in the 70 to 85 yard zone, depending on how much speed that player has. And you cannot afford to get to 50 and 40 yards from the green. You either get basically inside 15 yards, in my view, where you can stop it with land angle, or you go all the way back to your doubled up zone in that I'm mentioning, that kind of sweet spot of this approximately 75 yards where, you know, people routinely hit a pretty full 60 degree. So I think that is often, almost all the time, overlooked. I told that to Duffner. He didn't even think of it that way. He said, that's great to know. But he didn't connect those dots just as recent as a couple of years ago.
And just to finish on this slide, Layne, to just for the benefit of the audience, that the reason we get the big change in land angle is fundamentally because the ball is in the air long enough for the fluid forces to have a substantive effect. And when I say the fluid forces, the air resistance forces. And there's a bit of a combination there, because the more spin you have on the ball, the more the ball will want to stay in the air because the spin holds it up. And then if the wind resistance is against you, which it will be, then that'll slow the horizontal velocity. So the ball's been kept in the air a long time by the spin. The fluid has more time to act on the ball, and so then it will drop out of the sky that much more steeply. And an interesting phenomenon is that the spin rate doesn't change much over the flight of the ball. So if it leaves at 9,100, as in this example here, it's almost, it's not quite, but it's almost 9,000 when it hits the ground. It doesn't really decrease its spin rate very much. So that's cool. Just a little kind of interesting physics aside for the nerds in the room with me.
Good couple of questions in here. That's quite cool data about that double up. Good one from Andre around any difference on female professionals in terms of the length kind of threshold.
I'll tackle that one, Layne. I don't know, because I haven't tested enough really high-level females on the wedge protocol. I've had maybe 4, so I wouldn't really want to draw conclusions on that, but it's definitely shorter because they don't generate as much speed as the men. But in reality, I mean, in theory, it shouldn't make any difference, because if you look at the club head speeds that these guys are creating for a 75-yard shot, it's probably in the 65 to 70 mile an hour range, and most of the touring female professionals would be able to generate that comfortably. So it's not necessarily because of a physical difference between male and female. I suspect it's much more to do with the environment in which the girls or ladies are expected to perform, and they're never, or I shouldn't say never, they're rarely required to hit shots to the green complexes that the PGA Tour players face week to week, and then clearly in the majors, even more difficult conditions.
Sure, makes sense. The other question is from another one from Doug, who's down south, and during the cold winters in Queenstown, he likes a good evening in front of ShotLink, analysing. He seems to, from his research, he's got here that even the ShotLink data tends to show that players that are closer to the hole still hit it closer to the hole. So in terms of that doubling up spot, is it just that they're incredibly talented in that space, or are they picking the spots relative to the hole where they can play a variety of shots to get it still close?
I'm going to let Layne comment after I make this one. So the data are absolutely clear from Mark Brody, that the closer you get to the hole with your approach shot, the closer your next shot will be to the hole. So if you hit a 350-yard drive and the hole's 450 yards long, then you will hit it on average closer than the guy who only hits it 250 yards off the tee and has got 200 yards left to go with this next shot. So, and you can extend that all the way to the green. Where the shots gained or strokes gained stuff in general can't be applied to specific situations like this. So you can't just say a generalization, just get the ball as close to the hole as you possibly can. It is true if there is an extremely simple approach to the green. Like if you're just got a vanilla flavored chip shot at 30 yards, you're going to hit it closer than a vanilla 75-yard shot. On average, you'll hit it closer from 30 yards. It's when you start getting pins behind bunkers or in quadrants of the green that are not easy to get to, maybe there are swales or whatever, that then the strategy of going to a different stopping power becomes critical. Anything further, Layne, on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a pretty clear example at trying to use a universal golf course, and in the spirit of April and being in this part of the world, using the Masters again, just look at what happened to Molinari when he got 50 yards from the green, 40 yards from the green on 15 last year. Everybody on 15 lays up strategically at the exact space we're describing, that blue trajectory window that's illustrated by Graham there, because the most important thing is that the ball stops. Those pins on 15 are kind of like featured on a knuckle. I don't know if you could see my hand, but the pin would be on top of my index knuckle there. And so that green has obviously a huge false front. It's got a massive amount of side tilt, and then it rolls off hard towards 16's pond in the back. And so the message is we've got to stop the ball, everybody. And so it's intelligent design. Everybody just goes to the same place, and that's kind of how I'd reinforce what we're trying to state. So and then if you look on the ShotLink, clearly the players know that. If you look at attempts that the best players in the world are having with their wedges inside of 100 yards, there's very few people. The weight of attempts between 75 and 100 is grossly outweighed the stuff that's occurring from 50 to 75, and so I think they understand the complexities there. I think you got to maybe look at the data differently and just kind of empirically watch what they're doing in a lot of scenarios. But yeah, that's a question that's been posed before.
That explanation makes sense to me, though.
So,
all right, Layne, what about this one? What happened to Lukey here?
well, Luke's got an amazing amount of spin at this distance. You obviously see some big overall spin numbers. Now we're starting to get into the 10,000 zone. And for the first time, we see a different land angle occur. You see the spin rate, the ratio of RPMs per yard shift even lower. That's not uncommon. That's what everybody's does in our study. But now we start to see a breaking point. Doc's probably a little better at this than I, but in my view, when you start getting much over 40, 41 in land angle, you're starting to really you should be able to grab the ball depending on the firmness of the green. You should have impactful pitch marks to repair. Unless you're on the PGA Tour, you don't even find your pitch marks. But that land angle is really, really big, and it's starting to emerge here. And let me just look if there's anything else that I'd like to say. This is the front pin location. It's the top of the spin loft mountain because it represents a culmination of your close to your maximum speed, the center of contact. You're not playing adjusted lead edges and added loft. You're into precision mode. You're trying to have a very controlled, precise delivery to a measured outcome distance, hit your number, and you're using maximum loft. So max speed, center contact, max loft. And so the problem is when you get outside of this zone, and we're not going to use an absolute number because clearly Luke Donald's zone of max stopping power would be different from, say, Brooks Koepka or Dustin Johnson. They would be more similar to each other because it has to do with your ability to generate power, like Doc was saying. But the problem is as you increase the speed and you get away from this zone, you're likely to change your spin loft by virtue of changing your attack angle and shaft leans. And so you kind of wreck a lot of your precision. The upside to increasing speed is that you would hit the ball high land angle. But at the same time, I think because this overall space needs to be viewed from a precision standpoint and kind of hitting and really delivering the club in a very precise way, find your good number and try to use it, not try to hit your 60 degree as far as you can, like we see a lot of these hot rods, under 25 years old doing, that we try to coach and communicate with sometimes, is like they're hitting their 60 degree 110 yards and you're like, it's spinning like 4,000 RPMs and it's going, 85 feet, 90 feet in the air. That's not going to work. It's just not going to work, especially if they get on a real golf course.
All right, so we're going to move to our spin loft mountain, Layne, and talk through this one here. So I'm going to, again, hope that I can keep the attention of people and they don't get too flustered by this graph that I've created for them to look at today. So move this out of the way. Good. Okay. So on the vertical axis here is spin rate, just pure RPMs. And then on the bottom axis, the abscissa or the x-axis is the loft. And I've just kind of tried to keep it simple. It's the spin loft. It's the difference between the attack angle and the dynamic loft, okay? So it's the angle formed between the normal to the club face and the direction of velocity or travel. And this is kind of a representative curve. It's not the white line here changes a little bit if there's a different friction coefficient, or if you use different golf balls or different materials in the club face. So this is the general concept here. All right, it's pretty close to reality, by the way, though. So it's not like, oh, I've just pulled this one out of where, and I'm displaying it because it looks good. These are pretty relevant to the golf scenario. So if you had a 0 face angle and a 0 attack angle, you'd have 0 loft. And you'd create 0 spin. Okay, so that's on the other side, on one side. On the other side, if you lay that face completely horizontal, you'll get no spin because you won't contact the ball. Right? There's no pressure between the ball and the club face, so you won't get any spin. And then what happens in between, obviously, is the reality that we have happen in golf every day. And so as you increase the loft of the club, so this is a typical 4-iron loft here, 24 degrees. And don't worry so much, oh, what's the attack angle and what's the dynamic loft? Let's just kind of keep it simple here, right? Our 4-iron, we get less spin with a 4-iron than a 6-iron, and less with a 6-iron than an 8-iron, and less with an 8-iron than a pitching wedge, right? And then you get to the top of this mountain, and I've highlighted it here, it's probably around 57 degrees. And then if you add more loft, you start getting a drop in the spin rate. So it doesn't keep increasing as you keep adding loft, right? And there are very important reasons that we're not going to go into here today to understand why that occurs, but what we know that is the spin loft mountain probably peaks around 57 degrees. It's probably a range, 56 to maybe it's 59, but something in of that order, okay? And we think, as an example, that the Charles Howe data that we collected, he was probably just over the top of the spin mountain curve. And I'd like Layne to elaborate why we think this out of Charles's data. And if you want, I can go back and bring his data up, but it was incredible spin rate per yard at 30 yards open face conditions. So why do we think that, Layne?
We think that simply just due to watching the land angles and stuff, and so it's a culmination of friction, which is spin, and the angle that you're applying spin to the surface. And so when Charles is 30-yard shot and putting on this virtual, I think he's capable of actually creating more spin because we're abnormally high. That they're kind of off the charts for what we would deem to be prescribed high spin launch angles. And then furthermore, his land angle was unusually steep. So he had blended perfectly a massive amount of stopping power. He was at a maximum stopping power area, not a maximum spin loft mountain. Those are two different areas. So featured in this illustration, he'd be to the right of the yellow line. He's just over the mountain, keeping pressure between the ball and the face, necessary for friction, but yet gaining the added benefit of a little bit higher trajectory, a little bit higher shot, and a little bit steeper land angle. So the ball behavior, just a little fudge of these numbers, the ball behavior is remarkably different than someone who's pitching the ball. His launch angle was around 35 and a half. His land angle was nearing 40. that's drastically different from what you're going to watch Graham McDowell do in that space. And the ball behavior, you would say that, oh, well, I would imagine that, you know, Charles spins it way more than Graham, and that's really not the case. It's the angle he's using spin. Doc?
Clear, Josh, or will I try to explain it again?
I'm not sure where everyone's at. I had followed it, but yeah, there was some terms in there for sure, but I'll wait to see if anybody comes in with a question on.
I'll do the Cliff Notes summary. This
Sure.
graph represents the maximum spin you can generate as a function of loft. So it's probably around 57. If you go past the peak, then your capability of generating spin drops. However, spin isn't the only thing that stops the golf ball. As Layne said, land angle contributes to it. So if we cheat by going a little bit past the spin mountain peak to gain a few extra degrees of launch, that then turns out to be a 5 degrees steeper land angle, our stopping power is immense. But it's like, I would say Charles is just riding the fact that on that day he had the perfect conditions to get to this point. If you change the conditions, I'm sure you'd find him go to the other side of the spin mountain peak.
And that was some of the difference in that Luke Donald shot, right? Those 2 10-yarders that you had, square versus open face. So
yep.
If you go back, the one where you said that he hit the pop-ups, that he'd obviously opened the face, got so much loft, he popped over the mountain and spin went down, but land angle was
not
higher.
necessarily got more loft. I think his delivery was probably very consistent in that sense, Josh. But I think that a blade or two of grass got between the ball and the club face and changed the coefficient of friction, which then changes this whole curve that we're looking at here. If you get a decrease in friction, let me get onto this graph here. If you get a decrease in friction, this curve moves in this direction to the left. So if the peak was over here now and it was dropping rapidly over here on the other side of that peak, Josh, then the friction is not going to be able to hold the ball on the face and create the spin.
Yeah.
That'd be like a sculled 60 degree or something hit too low on the face. That would be the most likely scenario of why you would go too far to the left with a 60 degree in your hand. It'd be just a miss hit. You didn't control your contact point. The other alternative is you had too much shaft lean, but that's pretty unusual. So most people don't spin a wedge because it's hit too low on the face on short little chip shots. Think of it that way. You can have no spin on a 60 degree for no less than 2 primary reasons. You need to monitor your contact point on the face, or you need to, in some crazy unusual circumstance, you have too much shaft lean.
Yep. That's cool.
Right, so I think the science part kind of over now, and we move into the coaching applications. So Layne has spent a lot of time in generating these slides and putting the points up together here. So I'm going to get him to speak to it, and I'll just chime in if there's something that I think is missing.
Yeah, so if you look at how to coach these control variables and how to create spin, and I think that's like Josh, you and I were catching up prior to the webinar today, that it's really a common question from a coaching standpoint. Well, how do I spin the ball? I get it virtually every lesson as a wedge coach. How are these guys doing it? It just blows people's mind. And so I'm trying to make a guide at the address position. This is kind of the low-lying fruit, to use that phrase. What can we do as coaches and teachers to create the best possible scenario for our players to perform in, and that would have to start at the address position. Okay, so let's look at the benefits, the pros and cons of putting the ball back in our stance. And let's just keep in mind a neutral position would be in the middle of the body. Okay, let's just as a neutral position would be middle of the body with maybe 5 degrees of shaft lean forward. Okay, so when we start deviating from that and we put the ball, I'm going to say 3 or 4 inches back. I mean, Duffner would put the ball 3 or 4 inches back in a heartbeat, and he puts it off of the middle of his right foot continually as he pitches the ball. Okay, so you have to say, well, what are the benefits of that? Let's look at the left side of this. The positive effects of that, as far as spin loft and creating spin, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to create shaft lean, okay, by putting the ball back. I think this chart got flipped somehow. The positive aspects of putting the ball back is that it would be creating shaft lean. And when you're creating shaft lean and you're actually increasing your attack angle in some cases, you would be leaning the shaft further forward and creating more friction on the golf ball by simply putting the ball back, okay? The downside to that would be if you're putting the ball back in your stance, your club path is moving more inside out, and your face has to become shut to the path, close to the path, and you start kind of pivoting away at that point from the spin formula. So even though I put the ball back and I've gained shaft lean and potentially moved closer to the spin loft scenario through dynamic loft delivery, attack angle combinations, I've all of a sudden got an inside out club path and a closed face angle. It makes it more difficult for me to contact the toe, which is critical for the creation of spin. And sometimes my attack angle actually spikes and it gets too steep. Okay. Lastly, the creation of spin is formulated through speed. And so we're going to spin the ball a lot more from 30 yards overall than we would spin it at 10. And so we need speed and we need a low smash. And so we're kind of moving away from that at that point. When the ball is back in our stance, our smash is really high and we're using a really low club speed to pitch the ball. And so those are kind of the pros and cons. Doc, did our graph get flipped there?
No, I think it was just the way we were thinking about what does the ball back in your stance do? Well, what it does is it allows you to get a more in-to-out path. It increases the attack angle, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not sure the negative effects. Yeah. Maybe I'll just leave that and go to the next slide here because it but if we and maybe these did get flipped, Layne, I'm not sure. So positive effects, if the ball forward, it's harder to get more shaft lean and but you can easily get lots of spin loft, but it's hard to get an attack angle that's appropriate and a path and face relationship that's appropriate as well. So that's just maybe we need to just work that slide a little differently in the future, Layne. But I think that if we could summarize this way, changing the ball position at address doesn't necessarily always have, but can have remarkable effects on many of the control variables. and therefore the ball performance. And perhaps this audience knows that stuff pretty well, that, you know, you put the ball back, you're going to get more shaft lean and a path that goes more into out and blah, blah, blah. Whereas a ball forward, you're probably going to get an out to in club path and more loft and less shaft lean and all of those sorts of things. So let's not worry too much about the absolute detail in the slide. Layne and I will tidy that up so that it's absolutely clear when you get a copy of the presentation.
And so what is the next slide here, Doc, is the teaching takeaways from the information is we believe it's really crucial to learn what the control variables are, which we visited on a couple of weeks ago, and really how to manipulate them towards the result of spin or no spin. Like we need obviously be able to teach people how to hit a flop shot. And if they don't have an address position that's conducive to that, and it's too far back with too much shaft lean, we would start there. And that kind of goes back to the last few slides we just spoke about. So learn the CVs and what inputs you need to put into, you know, watch the behavior of how the club's contacting the ball. And if you don't see the ingredients necessary to hit a flop shot, or on the other side of the spectrum, if you don't see the ingredients necessary to hit a spinning wedge from 60 and 70 yards, then it would be crucial to access that and learn how to manipulate it. How do you create a shallower attack angle, or how do you get a club path left? I would start at address position with those questions from a teaching standpoint, and then learn what to expect from we'll say the wedge optimization. Know what the expectations are of your players when they're hitting a 50-yard shot. It's probably pretty valuable information to know that a tour standard 50-yard shot would spin 150 RPM per. And so that's relevant if I've got a high-skilled player who wants to work on his wedges. It's a reference point, and it's valuable if he could just put up and track 100 RPM per yard. Maybe you work towards that 150 RPM per yard as a model, but learn how to optimize wedges, no different to how we do driver fittings. And so there's very specific standards of how a ball comes off the face and how it behaves in the sky. I think from a teaching standpoint, we can use a lot of this information to teach short game better and really improve players' performance and scoring just through ball data. And then lastly, as a footnote, the value of new equipment, I think, is underestimated tremendously, and that means encouraging people to play premium balls. That's the messaging that Titleist loves for Doc and I to convey. We believe it. We've seen it. We've tested it objectively. It's proven. Premium golf balls make a huge difference, just like fresh wedges do. And then lastly, a few years back, at a club of 900 members, at a private club of 900 members, I sold 236 wedges in one calendar year, because I got everybody to believe and understand what we're talking about today. So there's profitability in it. There's ways to make sales. There's ways to improve performance and scoring all at the same time from a teaching standpoint with this information.
And Layne, just one other point on the wedge optimization. It's kind of, again, you've spoken about this previously, but if you're working with your bogey golfers who aren't very good at leaning the shaft, then or that they aren't comfortable about rotating the leading edge open, then the set of wedges that they have in their bags should look different to the ones that you have in your bag or that a tour player would have. So the choice of equipment there should be in some ways, or in many ways, related to the skill level, but also the technique of the players who are hitting the shots. So it's not, oh, well, everyone should have a 60-degree wedge in their bag and heel relief on the grind because that's what Luke Donald does. No, just the opposite. You've got to find the right fit for the guy who's in, or the gal who's in front of you.
The last thing I'll say about wedges, it got to be real easy. I had kind of a captive audience at my club. I would say, hey, we need to do a wedge fitting. Okay, let's go out. And what happens when you do that is you spend a lot of time on your most lofted club. But as you know, nobody wants like one Titleist 60-degree, 2 Callaways, and a TaylorMade in their wedge set. Okay, and so what happens is you've already got them believing like I need consistent wedges to match the remainder of my bag. And so now the door immediately opens up for a sale of 3 wedges or even 4 wedges, because they also don't realize that Callaway or whoever has a 42-degree 9-iron, and now they have this huge loft gap, and they need to have a club that they've never had before in their bag. They need a 47-degree perhaps, and then you start moving towards solutions. Well, how do I keep 14 clubs? And you look at this 22-degree 4-iron and their 5 hybrid, and they go the same distance, and they never hit one of them. And so it becomes pretty easy to kind of get 4 wedges sold, I found, especially with modern equipment these days and the loft plane so strong. That's kind of how I viewed it. I wouldn't want to break up my wedge set. I would want some continuity in design and brand there. And then, everybody, it just got to be a lot easier than you thought. And so, selling $150 wedges, selling $600 in wedges wasn't that uncommon in an afternoon.
Yeah, and you need to get the general consumer, I guess, ready for that type of setup in their bag. So the key on that, I'm sure, as you're saying, is that awareness and education around the need of all 4 of them before all of a sudden they've just got 4 options in their bag and they're not sure what bloody shot they're trying to play with which bloody club. So yeah, certainly that fitting and education component definitely comes in as on the front end of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Doc, the purpose isn't necessarily to, well, my goal is here to sell 4 wedges. It's, that's an aside. I mean, you would do all of your other work first and you go, well, the next step would be, if you want to get better performance, then choose a better ball or choose a set of wedges that are going to allow you to access a better performance.
But it is a real, that big gap, it is a real problem with the specifications that manufacturers are putting on their irons now. It's just, even when some of the trainees and we get them doing their fit in stage 3, you're starting to see an 8-degree gap, between, like you said, between the first wedge they've got and their 9-iron, and you're like, well, what happens in this space? And it's like, oh, I don't know. Yeah,
and really the way that they load those clubs, they don't spin. And so if you get a real 46 or 48 in their hands and they see the value of a forged wedge compared to these hot loaded perimeter weighted 9-irons, they go, wow, now talking with you, I understand the value of spin. I can spin this club. I'm going to hit this way more than I hit that 22-degree that I hate, whatever it ends up being, some kind of hybrid that they've had forever, some old wood they have. It's a very natural progression. Put a lot of emphasis on the 60 or 58 or 62, whatever they need, and work your way down, keep it approximately 4 or 5-degree gaps. And you're going to discover all these equipment issues and how they evolve. Sometimes it even leads to hybrid sales because they don't have the right hybrid in their bag, And so I just found I sold a lot of equipment based on knowledge in that space.
It's a fitting wedge back down, isn't it?
Yeah. Just keep going, Layne. Your coaching takeaways on practice?
Coaching takeaways. So I think that if you look at the first piece, there's got to be a lot of emphasis. If we know our primary means of stopping the ball near the hole is with launch angle and open face conditions, we have to practice a lot of that. And it goes without saying, it's not that you substitute your open face practice for any square face conditions. It's just, I think the expectations of the coach or teacher is that we have to get the square face stuff up and down, or at least close to the hole. And then that's the daily work. The upper registry and the real way to pull away from the rest of the field is by learning the open face conditions, okay? And so we're not going to be competitive if we don't get the square face stuff up and down. So I don't want to make any assumptions here. We've got to do that well, but you're really going to perform on harder golf courses when you get open face conditions and you practice a lot of them. And as you saw, we're using 30 degrees as a relative number there. It's important to be able to go over and under that number at shorter distances, but really the true art in our view is how to create a ball that flies under that 30 degree.
Yeah, and that's more for the distance wedges, right, Layne?
Yeah, that's more for the distance wedges, because if you remember all the launch angles from all the 10, 20, 30 stuff we looked at, it was a little bit north of 30. But I do think there needs to be a ton of open face stuff, because that's where the real creativity occurs.
We've talked quite a bit about laying up, finding out what that distance is, and clearly the PGA Tour shot link data say to avoid that 20 to 60 yard zone, because that's an extremely difficult shot even for the best players in the world. And then from a playing perspective, Layne, oops, let me clear this thing over here for you. You can talk to that while I'm clearing this. So what's the purpose of this one here, Layne?
Well, I try to give some, images that convey some stuff. We've got Tiger really, this is an oak tree on the top left. He's kind of in a collection area. He's got a forced carry, probably, pin cut up. He's kind of just sitting there being thoughtful about what to do here. He clearly has a variety of things he can try, but I think that as a player, once you really understand the art of it and the exploring all the different shots, where to hit it on different parts of the club, the different club paths I can use, the different amount of shaft lean and address position, and as you push those limits on one side, you need to understand what putting the ball back does to the golf ball and make those connections. And so that's really becoming a master and a balanced player. I mean, I think everyone viewing this would agree Tiger has the ability to both be analytical and creative. You hear that when Mickelson talks as well. He's incredibly analytical and he's incredibly creative at the same time. These are very different players in my view than, say, just Seve Ballesteros or Nick Faldo. I think these are more balanced in their approach, certainly more balanced in their approach to how they explore the short game, not comparing one to be better than the other. I'm just saying their approach, they evolve as players and they have this huge arsenal because of their curiosity and their variety of technique being used. So I happen to find that picture of Mickelson hitting it backwards, which we all know he's famous for, but that's a little tongue in cheek. But it is a product of his approach to the game and the way that he plays.
And Josh, we've probably got 5 minutes before we need to wrap this up. We have a couple of slides, but if there are any questions, I'd prefer to field those first, and then if not, then we'll go to the last little bit.
I've got a couple of questions inside, I guess, the wedge play, and then a couple as well. One, I guess, that was brought up, which wasn't on here, which I said to Layne earlier, was a little bit around the differences in sequencing on wedge play, say, versus full swing. There are some differences, but what do they look like? Is it timing? Is it sequencing? Is it speed related? Any insights into that space?
The quick one is this, that firstly, the transition sequence is the same. It's over a slightly shorter period of time, but it's still the same. So despite what Mr. Seekman says, that it's a reverse sequence. That's not correct. At least on the multiple players I've looked at, and then I spoke with Phil Cheatham last week as well, and he says, the sequence not right. He said all of his data show the same thing that mine have shown. Secondly, and I made this comment last week as well, I don't think that the kinematic sequence where the looking at peak speeds and acceleration, deceleration patterns is even appropriate for wedge play until you're getting up to the distance wedges, because there are many different ways in which we can move our body to create relatively low club head speeds. The sorts of things that we'd see in finesse wedge shots. So we should be looking at strategies that provide us with the greatest amount of consistency and precision. So that's not necessarily a dynamic kinematic sequence notion. So we're not looking to get maximum energy out to the club head. So the whole notion of a kinematic sequence which is really what that's about, is not appropriate for finesse wedges. And I like the notion of you would build up speed and then kind of glide or just keep going at those same rotational velocities with your different body segments for the finesse wedges.
Cool.
That's my quick summary, Josh.
Nice. And then a couple of questions, I guess, one for Layne and a little bit around some of the training stuff. So we got one on distance wedges. So I noted in some of your stuff you started with, say, a proper dynamic loft and then speed control, say, was the second part. Any of the kind of maybe some of the drill stuff that you'd use initially when you're starting in that space?
Well, I think if you're going to do distance wedges, especially the good players and probably the average golfer, you got to have a good radar, and that's just going to be the shortcut. The old-fashioned just, going out in the field and pitching the ball, that's really tedious. It's pretty inefficient to practice that way. But, the first thing you want to do is get a consistent launch and really monitor the strike location on the face, and then you could start to realize I've got a consistent dynamic loft, and none of the monitors are great at giving high quality attack angles, but just simplify it. Let's get a consistent launch angle, and let's just verify that we're in the middle of the face. And so once we've done that, we've achieved a sub 30 launch angle for a distance wedge. I think there needs, and you could do that with a lot of block practice programming. Okay. Beyond that, and the second level of refinement is you need to be able to vary your speeds and keep that club delivery. That's a really strong takeaway, is create the technique first, then create the feel with the technique. That starts to introduce the more randomized practice sessions where you have to use the 60 degree with the same setup and hit it 2 to 3, 4 different distances. And again, you could monitor on the TrackMan or your club speed delivery. Keeping in mind that the shaft lean is always more important for ball control and distance and carry. I would do a ton of that, but probably the best thing that I found is I will chunk, working with Duffner on his distance wedges, I'll do a customized TrackMan combine where I will customize different areas like 50 to 75, 75 to 100, 100 to 125. I'll chunk it into 25 yard segments, or I'll allow him to do it, but I'll hit these 20 and 25 yard segments with him, to where he has to hit a bunch of randomized distances. And then I'll look at the data and I'll say, you're a little bit steep here. Your attack angles are climbing too much. Or, Duffner actually tends to hit the ball too low, and he tends to not control his speed well. And so that's the kind of stuff that I can learn just by looking at the radar. And so I do a lot. I think the radar is probably best. That might be the best use of a TrackMan, is distance wedge work and ball collection data.
Yeah,
I think just adding one piece to that, Layne, is that as soon as you start, let's say we're working on our dynamic loft or shaft lean control. And so we'll go to a relatively low speed, low carry distance. Maybe it's 40 yards, maybe it's 50 yards, right? You get really good at doing that. As soon as you add speed, the first thing that's likely to change is the shaft lean. You're almost invariably with your players going to see them lose shaft lean when they start adding speed. So it's crucial then, once they are good at, let's say a sub-maximal distance wedge, one that's a very comfortable speed for them, that you increment in smaller steps then and get them good at 55 yards or 60 yards. Don't just go from 40 to 75 because they'll lose their dynamic loft control for sure.
Sure.
Another little quick way to do it, that's maybe even simpler than working like I just said, is find your perfect speed delivery. What is an optimal way? And don't tell them the numbers. Don't give them any feedback. Have the launch monitor running. Get the dynamic loft that you want as a coach. You know best. Get the ball optimized. Get that perfect number. And then grab their sand wedge, grab their pitching wedge. So now we at least have 3 perfect numbers on the table. And let's see if we could deviate our speed a little bit and be able to convey what that feel is. Like, let's come off of that edge 1 degree, we'll call it. Let's put a number on it. Let's see if we can come off of that. And then you could start to build out these other distances where you have clusters of good numbers. But that's at least a starting point where you have a good number that's relative to the feel of your 9-iron or 6-iron when you swing it.
Nice, that's great. I've got a bunch of other questions that people have sent through. Now, this will be my little sales plug for you guys here. I think about 4 of the 6 that I've got, I've already been able to answer by actually watching week 2 and 3 of your little 12-week Wedgecraft series. So hopefully there's some people that have asked that stuff. There is some really cool info in that. So yeah, if you're interested to dig into it a bit more, definitely jump on board with that. I've learned a ton from just the first 3 weeks, and yeah, looking forward to the next stuff coming out. So on that note, yeah, look, I can't thank you guys both enough for the time. It's so much time. I would very much appreciate it. You're certainly 2 of the best in the business in the wedge play, and I'm sure it extends a lot further than that. But yeah, and yeah, like I say, really thanks. And if everyone will, I've got a copy of the presentation. I think we'll fix up a couple of things and get those out. And similar to the other stuff, we'll have this loaded back up on the Vimeo channel for everyone for a little bit of viewing after this, if there's anything they want to go back on. So on that note, thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
We look forward to speaking soon.
Thanks again, Josh.